Hi, everybody. Welcome to our Google Plus Hangout with the Buck Institute for Education. I'm John Larmer, the editor-in-chief here at BIE.
I'm John Mergendoller, Executive Director at BIE.
And we're here today to talk about the gold standard for project-based learning, the why and the what of gold standard PBL. And we're going to talk a bit about why we decided there was a need for a gold standard model for project-based learning, and then talk a little bit about how we changed our model from the old 8 essential elements we had in our previous model. And just a reminder, for those of you watching and viewing around the world, this Hangout will be archived at bie.org in case you missed some of it or want to share it with a friend. You can ask questions using the Q&A feature there in Google Hangouts, and we'll try to get to them during the Hangout, or if not, we can answer them offline on the Google Plus events page later. And this will last for about half an hour, so from 12 to about 12:30 here in Pacific time in California. So with that, let's get started and talk about why we decided there was a need for a gold standard model for project-based learning. So John, why don't you start off on that one?
Well, I see you have on the screen a page from a Google search, and anyone who has put project-based learning or even PBL into the search box soon finds that there are millions of responses, things that have to do with project-based learning. Some are in engineering, some are in K-12 education, some are in aerospace design, but the ones we're interested in are the ones that focus on what kids do in the classroom. Since PBL is so popular, it's very easy to think that you're doing it or have an idea of what it's supposed to be like, but really not understand the fundamentals of it. And this is something that we were very concerned about with everyone doing PBL. Is it really the case that no one is doing good PBL? And two things happen if you try project-based learning but haven't thought through your project or don't have the management moves and skills needed. First, your class can turn to chaos, as this illustration here represents. In the 60s, there were a lot of people that tried to do project-based learning, and it really turned into a lot of messing around. Kids may have enjoyed it, but they weren't necessarily learning. Their hands might be on, but their minds were turned off. And then the other thing that happens for people who aren't really prepared to dig into PBL is that the projects become trivial, what we call dessert projects, projects that are building things but not learning things, or taking trips but not really understanding what the trip is all about and why we took it in the first place. So we make the distinction between main course projects, which are nutritious and have the stuff of learning in them, and dessert projects, which are enjoyable and sugary but don't really have much nutrition.
And we're sort of afraid that a lot of people might be producing things these days that are called projects or project-based learning. So you'll get a kit to build a robot or something, and that's a project. Well, it's maybe a project, but it's not really project-based learning. They're not learning the curriculum through that. It's just a fun activity you do after you've gone through a unit. So we can see a lot of these things popping up. That Google search was page 3 of a search, but as you said, there are over 4 million hits now for project-based learning, and a lot of those produced by commercial publishers or even teachers sharing projects with each other. The quality could be really uneven. So we don't want PBL to be a flash in the pan. We don't think it is. We think it's really a 21st century teaching method that's here to stay, but we don't want its reputation damaged, and there could be some backsliding, or people might try it and fail. Teachers will give up. Districts might try it and didn't work. Let's try something else next year. So to prevent that kind of thing from happening, we think PBL should be here to stay, but to do so, it's got to be done right. So,
and I think we want to convey that we've been working with teachers for the last 10 years or so on project-based learning, and they've taught us a great deal. And our own thinking about project-based learning has changed and become deeper and richer. And in thinking about trying to create a standard for project-based learning, a gold standard, something that identifies the essential parts that must be in a project, and then later the essential aspects of teaching using projects. We've really drawn on what we've learned from being in classrooms as well as a research literature on what works in education.
And we hope this gold standard will be useful to people in the field, not just for our own district partners or teachers we give workshops to, but for lots of other people in the PBL world. We hope this gold standard model will provoke dialogue about what is high quality PBL. It can be used to calibrate the work of a school or a network among teachers. And just really help, pay attention to the quality of PBL across the board with a common language. So we welcome lots of feedback on this, and we know this is not going to be set in stone. For now, it's our model, but we're open to change, certainly. So we certainly welcome comments and feedback. The next image, our slide here shows the essential project design elements. So we're going to talk about each of those things and compare that to our older model for the 8 essential elements of project-based learning. So as you can see in this diagram, it's kind of like the lens of a camera, focusing on, in the center, the student learning goals, and the the features of a project are in the red sections surrounding those student learning goals in the center. Let's talk about each of those briefly and how they compare with our old gold standard model. Our old 8 essential elements model. The next slide shows our old model, which some of you might recognize, the familiar blue hexagon, which has been widely circulated, and we use it in our workshops and our books and other materials. And as you can see there, there were 6 elements around the blue ring and then 2 in the center to make 8 total. Let's talk about then how our elements change and why we changed them. All right, so the next slide talks about what goes in the center, the student learning goals. And as you can see, our image here, the 2 train tracks going together, both skills and content. So we call it the key knowledge and understanding and the success skills. In our old diagram, we had them separated. There was a dotted line between them, but it was still 2 separate things. But now we think they really should be thought of together as one thing, because the success skills, critical thinking, problem solving, collaboration, and so forth, you do those things while you learn content, while you gain the key knowledge and understanding from standards-based content. So a lot of the standards nowadays have those kind of skills built right into them. Common Core standard, other recent state standards talk a lot about critical thinking, students collaborating, making presentations with speaking and listening standards. So a lot of those so-called success skills or 21st century skills, also called college and career readiness skills, they're built right into the standards. So we think the term success skills is a good, short, non-jargony way to describe those things. But they're in the center. Those are the student learning goals. By the way, the next slide shows our success skills that we think are sort of basic to most projects. You'll see critical thinking, problem solving, which go together, collaboration, and self-management skills. And we think this will sort of help lead to the ideal graduate. John, you want to say a little bit more about why we chose those success skills?
Sure, and I think it's important that we say that we think districts, schools, teachers, they're in charge here. If they want to add or subtract some success skills, we're fine with that. But we tried to boil it down. Teachers have a lot to do, and to lay on one more expectation for they're going to develop in their students. I think one has to be really careful to not overburden. And so we looked at what are the things that are going to make a difference in a student's life in school and after school. And clearly, the ability to think critically, deeply, to solve problems as they arise, to think about how they can take what they learned with one problem and apply it to another problem. This is something that is going to support a student forever. And as a student and as an adult, our life is filled with solving problems. And the second success skill is that of collaboration. The workplace today is a collaborative workplace made up of teams. And it's no longer the individual against the world, it's the team against other teams. And it's really important, we believe, that students learn how to work with each other, how to take leadership positions, how to follow leadership, how to collaborate toward a common goal. And then the final thing that we espouse is that of self-management. And this has been called a lot of different things, but the basic idea is that the student is in control of their own behavior and actions and thinking. They're not just dependent upon a reward system or what their friends are doing, but that they have grit and that they're able to make decisions themselves about what they're going to pursue, how they're going to pursue it, and then hold themselves accountable for their actions in reaching their own goals. So it's a very sort of a self-directed and self-motivated stance that we're taking that we think goes quite well with learning to do projects.
Mm-hmm. And our former lists had things like communication, which we think is covered pretty well by reading and writing and speaking and listening standards. So that's why that one of the 4 C's, which some of you might have heard of, is not there. And then creativity and innovation shows up on a lot of lists. And we think it's very important, but it's not going to be in every single project. Some projects might lend themselves more to creativity, innovation than others. But we think problem solving, critical thinking, collaboration, self-management will be in every project. And districts and schools and teachers may want to add additional ones of their own too. So anyway, let's move on to the challenging problem or question. Our next image shows where some of those challenging problems and questions might come from in the real world. And this changed from our former model, the 8 elements, which had driving question on it. We still think driving questions are important. And we think it's good for teachers to sort of operationalize a challenging problem or question with a student-friendly driving question for a particular project. But the fundamental thing about a project, what it's about really, is this idea of some kind of challenging central problem or a big question for students to answer. There's some examples there on the slide of, when do we grow up? That kind of a big philosophical question. There could be a practical real-world problem, like there are mice in our school building. How can we solve that problem? So lots of things like that might form the basis of a project. And driving question is still important, but we want to take in sort of the broader kinds of projects that might be design challenges. Problem-based learning uses a problem statement to frame the project. So we wanted this to be a big tent. The next element, sustained inquiry, is not too different from our old element, which was in-depth inquiry. But John, why did we switch to sustained? Or we talked about extended also at one point, instead of just in-depth.
Well, I think it's really important that the inquiry occur over time. Our concern with in-depth inquiry was that it might mean that someone spent a really intense 2 hours online looking for something. And while that's important perhaps, it's not nearly as important as coming back to it 2 days later and seeing if you could continue to dig and to see what you can find that's even more relevant. So we think there's a time dimension here, inquiry that occurs over time, that has steps, that builds upon what's on what's been learned. So that's why it's sustained.
And we wanted to make sure people realize that project-based learning or a project is lengthy. It's not just a 2-day activity called a project, because there isn't time for sustained inquiry in 2 days. You can go deep into one topic briefly in a day, sure. But this idea of extending inquiry over time with the cycle of questions and digging deeper that John mentioned, that also implies that a project takes 2 or 3 weeks, not just 2 or 3 days.
And it also ties into the success skill of self-management.
Right.
That if you're going to do sustained inquiry, there is some self-management going forward to keep pushing at what you're trying to learn.
Mm-hmm. All right, our next slide talks about authenticity, which is a new element. It's not new to people who know project-based learning, of course, and we've talked about authenticity a lot over the years. I wrote a blog about it a couple of years ago, which sort of talking about a scale of authenticity, how you can have simulations, not so authentic, but better than nothing, and then fully authentic being out in the community doing real world work. But we decided to put authenticity as a standalone element of its own in our gold standard model. And well, what about authenticity? What's good about authenticity?
Well, authenticity is extremely motivating to kids.
Yeah.
So that's certainly one benefit. But it also ties into learning the sorts of skills and behaviors and expectations that the student is going to face in the real world. So why not have, say, a journalist come in and read student writing and give comments so that you're really getting authentic feedback, the kind that the world gives, not just school gives. Or why not learn about physics or physical relations between forces by going to the workplace, say maybe an auto shop, something like that, and looking at the forces within engines and how those are maintained. We think that by highlighting the authentic aspect of projects, you not only increase student motivation, but you provide a context which is much more interesting and true to the actual phenomena that you're studying.
And it probably actually increases student learning too, not just motivation, because kids connect to it better, and I think it sinks in better when it's real. The other aspect of authenticity is it could be authentic to students' personal lives, their own interests, their own culture, their identity. So it can be personally authentic as well as authentic to the workplace or problems people solve in the real world. All right, our next image is a familiar one, which has not changed from our old model. Student voice and choice. Still important that students be given some control over the process, over the products they create. Also adds to motivation, adds to their learning. The students have a sense of ownership when they're doing projects. So that has not changed. Our next slide talks about an element that has changed a little bit, and that is reflection. I mentioned that we had reflection before coupled with revision, but now it stands on its own because we think reflection is important for learning, both to think about the process and the product during a project. What did John Dewey say about reflection?
Yeah, we went back to our Dewey as we were thinking about this, and he makes an important point that learning is not based on doing; it's based on reflecting on the doing, and that it's the process of thinking about what you've done that is crucial, not just doing it. And we think that makes a lot of sense. A lot of the current focus on the cognitive science is on reflection and how that's connected with learning.
So reflection could take place during a project to ask students to pause and reflect on what they're learning. They could keep a journal. They could have discussions, reflect, with each other, both with themselves, the teacher, and then at the end of a project, they can look back on the whole project and talk about the project itself as well as what they learned and how they grew and developed success skills and so forth. But it happens throughout a project. The next element is critique and revision, and this has not changed since our older model of the 8 essential elements. This has to do with creating high quality products through cycles of feedback and peer feedback from the teacher, from outside experts perhaps, to revise students' work, go back and learn more if they feel it's needed, and create the next draft of a product. And the last element we want to talk about has changed a little bit also from public audience in the old model. Now it's public product. And we think that's a subtle but important change.
Why is that?
Well, audience sort of implied that every project has to end with a presentation, a formal presentation to some sort of live audience. And that's not necessarily true. We were really thinking of audience more broadly as the users of a product students might create, or people who download a book students produced and read it, or view a website students created. So lots of kinds of audiences, but it got confusing. People thought it was just about making a presentation. And some projects don't need to end that way. But by making a public product, we think it's motivating. I mean, kids think, okay, this is not just my teacher seeing this or my classmates, it's the real world, adults, experts, professionals. I care about making my work look good. So it leads to higher quality work. It's good for a school also to sort of showcase its work and show community and parents, this is what PBL is. This is what our kids can do. Might surprise some parents and community members what kids can do when you show them project work. But also, we kind of came upon this a little bit later. Our thinking evolved as we were writing this. When students create a product and make it public, it then becomes discussable. It's sort of part of what a learning community does.
Right, and so I can bring my perspectives to it, I can learn from it, I can raise questions, and I can drive your thinking deeper by the questions I raise. So,
yeah, it's kind of a way to publicly reflect on learning and on our quality and our standards. Is this good enough? And how did I do this? How can I make it better? So it makes learning a social act, not just a private little exchange between a teacher and a student. So subtle change, we think important in that public audience. All right, so that's the rundown of how our elements change and why. And
looks like there's a question.
oh, we got a question up there. Suggestions for convincing colleagues to change from dessert projects to more time-consuming but richer main course projects. Yes, that's a tough one, because a lot of people do think that just doing a quick project, it's fun, kids are engaged, but you got to ask, what have they really learned? So our materials, our books, our workshops are all designed to help teachers design main course projects. And it's a way to include more of your standards in a project. It's a way to actually deliver the content, not just have a fun activity at the end to apply the content. It's a more powerful way to actually teach the content, and students retain what they learn longer and better. They learn more deeply.
I would answer by saying, look at some of the videos on our site. Look at the San Diego field guide to the Bay project.
Right, Media Saves the Beach is the video's name. Right.
Media Saves the Beach. Look at the projects that were done at Tam High and Envision School, where the students talk about the impact it had on their lives and what they had to learn.
I think it might be wise also, we always advise people to start off small. Don't try and do a whole bunch of main course projects your first semester or after you've read a book or taken a workshop or something. Plan one really good project. And if it's rigorous and administrators, students, parents see that it's rigorous and it's a way to teach content and build skills and really engage kids, their hearts and minds, I think they'll be pretty convinced that PBL is a good way to go.
And I think the other thing is, if you have to, just don't pay too much attention to your colleagues. Be the example in that school that the kids look to and see that things are going on in your class that are more exciting than what's happening next door.
Yeah.
And, eventually your colleagues will pay some notice to that.
There are some projects on our website also you can look at, which have the project overview form all filled out. It's like a planning form, which shows how rich the project is and how it connects to standards and success skills, the scaffolding that's planned and so forth. So check out some of those examples on our website of the project design overview and the project design student learning guide forms all filled out for sample projects. And those are pretty convincing. All right. I want to mention briefly our next slide, just show it for a couple seconds, our project-based teaching practices. We'll get more into this in Hangouts to come. This is a little preview. We'll talk more about what it means to be a teacher in a PBL environment and go through this aspect of gold standard project-based learning. So
we've got one more question,
yeah,
which asks how early, what grade level can PBL be implemented? We've seen really exciting projects in preschool and kindergarten. So there's a wonderful book by Sylvia Chard about using projects with students at that grade level, CHARD, just like the vegetable.
Right, the project approach, I think, is part of the title. But yeah, she talks a lot about early childhood project-based learning. And it's a little bit different with little kids. You can't have them work independently as much. You might do whole class projects. They aren't in teams on their own. But so you have to manage it differently, but it really does work. And I've seen teachers build in reading skills, writing skills, math skills into projects. A good one I saw at Catherine Smith School in San Jose last year, the kindergartners had a project called Stray, Stray, Go Away about stray animals and what to do about them in the community. And they actually worked with a local animal control person on that project. So it was great seeing these little 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds standing up and presenting their work to an audience at the end. It was. It can be done at all grade levels. You just have to manage it differently.
So rush out and buy our book.
Right. We'll conclude with our last slide. The gold standard project-based learning is outlined in a new book we wrote for ASCD. They published it. It's coming out in the end of May. It'll be available, I believe, May 26th, the publication date. Setting the standard for project-based learning. Our co-author, Susie Boss, contributed chapters in that book also about leading a school toward project-based learning, and also one on PBL and informal learning in summer school. And also in this book are chapters about the gold standard itself and the research behind PBL, and then a chapter for teachers on designing projects and managing projects. So 2 chapters there for K-12 teachers, very practical advice, like our other books on our own publications. So look for that from ASCD, and that wraps up today's Hangout. A little reminder about 2 weeks from now, we'll be having another one with Susie Boss, our co-author, as a guest host, and 2 of our staff members, Roddy Boonchoy and Jennifer Cruz, who work with our district and school partners. And they'll talk about what it means to lead a school toward system-wide implementation of PBL. So that'll be a great Hangout. Next week, 2 weeks from now, noon Pacific time, that's Tuesday, May 25th. So if you have any more questions, please leave them on the events page, and we thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.